So, the explosive story coming out of Buckingham Palace right now isn't actually about priceless diamonds, even though that's exactly how it started. It's about a highly sensitive private note from Kate Middleton that got maliciously leaked to the press by Palace aides. And the reason the entire situation fell apart so fast is because someone made a very basic, calculating mistake. They only leaked the angry parts. They deliberately cut out the ending, where Kate offered a graceful compromise, and that single malicious edit turned what was supposed to be a quiet, dignified attempt to avoid drama into a full-blown institutional crisis. And honestly, the fact that the palace is now openly admitting the betrayal came from inside Camilla's own household tells you absolutely everything about who stood to gain from making these two senior women look like bitter enemies. Before we get into the granular details of how this all spectacularly unraveled, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any updates on this story. Let's start with the agonizing moment Kate found out she was preparing for a private engagement when her communications secretary walked in holding a printed copy of her own handwritten note. Just picture that for a second. You write something meant for exactly one person, you choose your words incredibly carefully because you know exactly how sensitive the subject is, and then someone hands you a printout and tells you a journalist is about to publish the whole thing. Kate read the first paragraph, stopped cold, and asked who else had seen it. Her voice stayed low, but she was gripping those pages like they were evidence, which at that point they undeniably were. The note itself was about something that sounds glamorous on the surface, but gets really complicated when you think about the power dynamics involved. Several historic pieces of jewelry connected to the late Queen Elizabeth were being reassigned, and nobody had consulted Kate. We're talking about legacy pieces intimately linked to the role she's supposed to hold one day, the future queen, and decisions were being made as if her opinion simply didn't matter. So, she wrote to Camilla directly, privately, trying to handle this woman to woman, instead of letting it become another embarrassing public spectacle. Her argument was basically that royal jewels shouldn't become personal rewards or private inheritance. That's a perfectly reasonable constitutional position when you're talking about items held in trust for the nation. But stripped of context, stripped of the conciliatory ending she'd written, that line made her sound like she was outright accusing Camilla of greed. And here's where the betrayal gets incredibly specific. The formatting of the leaked copy carried a digital clue that pointed directly to where it came from. It had been scanned inside Camilla's household, not Kate's office. That's not wild speculation, that's a verified document trail. Only a very small circle had handled the correspondence, and the paper trail led straight back to the Queen Consort's staff. When Kate realized this, she placed the pages flat on the table, took off her engagement ring, steadied her breathing, and canceled every non-essential meeting. She wasn't reacting as a wounded relative anymore. She was preparing as a future queen who completely understood that this was no longer about jewelry. It was about whether her private words could be weaponized against her. William received a documented warning from a senior palace official shortly after. The note hadn't been leaked just to embarrass his wife. Someone actively wanted this dispute fully public, and once he understood that, the question became genuinely unsettling. Who benefits from turning two royal women against each other? Because the note was about jewels, sure, but the real conflict had never been about diamonds at all. For Camilla, the royal collection represented ultimate acceptance after decades of public rejection. She spent years being the woman crowds wouldn't cheer for, the one newspapers relentlessly mocked, the presence royal circles treated as a problem. Wearing jewels connected to earlier queens was tangible proof that the institution had finally accepted her. For Kate, those exact same objects represented duty still waiting ahead of her. She'd spent years entering royal life carefully, rarely demanding precedence, rarely challenging senior figures, accepting changes without complaint. To her, the jewels weren't personal possessions, they were historical instruments entrusted to whoever carried the crown's image and responsibilities. She believed those pieces should reflect continuity, not private rivalry. So when Camilla read the leaked extracts beside a trusted dresser, she didn't see a request for balance. She saw a vicious accusation of greed. She told the attendant that Kate could never understand what it had cost her to survive long enough to wear those pieces without condemnation. And Kate, for her part, felt wounded for a completely different reason. Her patience had been mistaken for weakness. She'd accepted delayed access, altered plans, and countless quiet compromises, but the sudden reassignment of several important pieces felt deliberate. It seemed designed to remind her that her future position remained entirely under someone else's control. William refused to accept the leak at face value. He meticulously compared the published extracts with Kate's handwritten copy and immediately noticed what had disappeared. The strongest lines had been preserved. The gentler ending had been surgically removed. Kate had closed the note by offering Camilla a private meeting and suggesting a shared arrangement that would respect the Queen Consort's present role while recognizing her own future responsibilities. That crucial passage never reached the press. William found his wife staring at a photograph of Queen Elizabeth wearing one of the disputed brooches and an open jewelry reference book beside her. He closed the book gently and said something that completely reframed the entire situation. This is no longer about what you wrote. It is about what they want people to believe you wrote. Kate's anger softened into hurt. She admitted she'd written the message as an act of respect, not an ultimatum. Then William demanded the original document log, and what he discovered changed everything. The note had entered palace records days before the leak, immediately after an earlier confrontation that no one had publicly acknowledged. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to go back to the ceremony where the first jewel was removed, the first warning was ignored, and the first line was crossed. Every palace crisis has a moment that seems insignificant until everything collapses around it. In this case, it happened during preparations for a state banquet at Buckingham Palace. A state banquet is a formal dinner hosted by the monarch for visiting leaders, and every single detail carries immense diplomatic and royal meaning. A velvet tray was opened, a historic necklace was presented, and Kate was told the arrangement had suddenly changed. No debate, no explanation, just a quiet instruction delivered, as though the future Princess of Wales had no right to ask why. That was the moment the private note became absolutely inevitable. 3 weeks before the leak, Kate arrived expecting to wear a diamond necklace traditionally associated with a direct line of succession. She'd already worn the matching earrings during an early reception, and palace planners had selected the full set to suggest continuity between past and future. Then a senior dresser quietly informed her that Camilla had reserved the necklace for herself. Kate didn't argue in front of the attendants. She watched as the velvet tray was removed, then asked everyone except her private secretary to leave. The humiliation was intensely controlled, but it was incredibly real. She'd accepted changes before, she'd stepped back when protocol demanded it. This time, the decision felt less like tradition and much more like a warning. Camilla defended the choice later that evening. Speaking privately with a senior aide, she insisted that no jewel should be treated as belonging to someone who had not yet reached the throne. She was angry that Kate's team had planned the complete set without seeking her final approval. To her, the decision was about authority. To Kate, it was about being deliberately diminished. The point of no return came before the banquet when Kate met Camilla in a palace corridor and asked whether the necklace had been withdrawn on purpose. The older royal didn't soften her reply. It was never yours to lose. Then Camilla walked into the reception before Kate could answer. One of her aides later recorded that exchange in an internal briefing note, which is a private document used to summarize sensitive events for senior palace staff. That single act transformed the family disagreement into an official household matter. The conflict now had a record, a version, and an audience far beyond the two women involved. Kate soon discovered the necklace wasn't the only piece affected. A sapphire brooch, closely linked to Queen Elizabeth, had also been scheduled for Camilla's exclusive use across several future engagements. Back at Kensington Palace, Kate began writing by hand. She tore up the first version because it sounded too angry, then produced a calmer note built around duty, history, and mutual respect. The message reached Camilla the next morning. Before Camilla could answer, an aide ordered it scanned, logged, and circulated far more widely than protocol required. By the time Kate learned how far her words had traveled, courtesy had already failed, and the next conversation wasn't going to happen through letters or secretaries or carefully chosen phrases. Kate didn't summon Camilla through official channels. She didn't send another note. She went directly to the Queen Consort's private sitting room and asked every aide to leave. When the door closed, there were no secretaries to soften the language, no courtiers to control the record, and no cameras to reward restraint. For the first time, Kate confronted her face to face and demanded to know who had betrayed her. She carried two versions of the same message, the original handwritten note and the leaked copy that had reached the press. Camilla was visibly surprised by the visit, but she refused to surrender control of the conversation. She asked why the princess had arrived without warning. Kate answered by placing both documents side by side and pointing to the final paragraph that had vanished. Someone had edited her words. She explained that she could endure disagreement over jewels, precedence, and ceremony. Precedence is the formal order that determines where members of the royal family stand, sit, and appear during official duties. She could even accept decisions she considered unfair. What she would absolutely not accept was private correspondence being stripped of its gentler meaning and used to portray her as grasping, impatient, or disrespectful. Camilla denied authorizing the leak. Her answer came quickly, but her confidence weakened when Kate asked why the note had been scanned and circulated through her household instead of answered privately. The older royal insisted her staff had viewed the message as an official challenge requiring advice. Kate didn't accept that explanation. Camilla reached toward the leaked pages, but Kate placed her palm over them and said, "No, you have already had my words. Now I need yours." The balance of the room shifted entirely. Camilla admitted discussing the note with her senior private secretary and communications advisor, though she continued to deny passing it to journalists. A private secretary is the senior official who manages a royal's correspondence schedule and sensitive decisions. Her denial was precise, almost too precise. She had not leaked the document herself, but she had allowed others to treat it as something larger than a family appeal. Camilla finally revealed the motive. Her team believed Kate was trying to establish control over the royal collection before William became king. They saw the note as a political challenge to the Queen's authority, not an attempt to preserve respect between two women. For one brief moment, Camilla's anger gave way to fear. She understood that her advisors may have acted in her name while leaving her morally exposed. Kate demanded the name of every aide who had access to the note. Camilla warned that a full investigation could damage Charles and destabilize both households. Kate left without answering. As the door opened, the king entered from the adjoining room. His expression made one fact unmistakable. He had heard enough. The dispute had crossed into his private world, forcing Charles to decide whether protecting Camilla now meant confronting the machinery that had acted around her. Charles had spent years defending Camilla from a hostile world. Now he faced a threat from inside the institution he controlled. If he dismissed the leak as a minor household mistake, he would wound Kate and alienate William. If he ordered a full investigation, he could expose the Queen Consort's closest advisors and raise questions about her judgment. The king sat between his wife and his heir, holding a file that could fracture the monarchy whichever way he turned. Charles understood where formal power rested. The royal collection, the historic jewels, artworks, and ceremonial objects held by the sovereign remained under his authority. Yet access was shaped by tradition, household planning, and final approval from the monarch. That arrangement was meant to preserve order. Instead, it had created competing camps around the people closest to the crown. Charles had given separate royal households wide freedom because he believed distance would reduce conflict. In practice, that freedom allowed aides to become defenders, strategists, and gatekeepers. Each office protected its principal's image. Each watched the others for signs of advantage. The king had wanted calm. He had created rival centers of influence. Charles read the document access report without speaking. When he reached the final page, he removed his glasses and placed them beside the file. Why did 9 people need to see a personal note addressed to my wife? No one answered immediately. Charles wanted to believe Camilla had known nothing. He remembered the years when he had promised to protect her from humiliation and public rejection. Punishing her household wouldn't look like a simple administrative decision. It could appear to question her legitimacy and reopen wounds both had spent years trying to close. William refused to let that fear decide the outcome. He told his father that Kate's trust had been violated and her reputation deliberately damaged. Silence, he warned, would send a brutal message. Anyone inside the palace could attack his wife without consequence, provided they claimed to be protecting someone more senior. Then, the investigation uncovered the hidden instruction. Camilla's senior communications aide had marked the scanned note for strategic handling. A communications aide manages media responses and public messaging for a royal household. The instruction recommended allowing selected journalists to hear that Kate was pressing claims over the Queen's jewels. Its purpose was clear. The leak was designed to weaken her before future allocations were decided. Charles picked up his pen and signed the suspension order. His hand paused before the ink touched the page because he knew the signature would be read as choosing his son's household over his wife's. Minutes later, another copy reached the press. This version came with palace emails suggesting Camilla knew her team planned to use the dispute publicly. Charles had tried to contain the betrayal with one signature, but the second leak transformed an internal scandal into a direct test of Camilla's honesty. By morning, the palace was no longer discussing jewels, it was discussing deception. Staff members stopped speaking freely in corridors, phones were collected before meetings, old allies began protecting themselves, and every deleted message suddenly mattered. Camilla faced the possibility that her closest advisors had sacrificed Kate's reputation to strengthen her own position. Kate, meanwhile, discovered that winning the argument could still cost her the one thing she had tried to preserve, the family's trust. Charles ordered immediate restrictions across both royal households. A royal household is the group of officials and staff who manages senior royals' duties, messages, and public role. Access to private correspondence was tightened. Communications teams surrendered their devices, and every scheduled decision involving historic jewels was frozen. What had once looked like a disagreement between 2 women had become a crisis involving the machinery surrounding them. The public story changed just as quickly. Early headlines had portrayed Kate as impatient and demanding. The second leak exposed missing paragraphs, internal instructions, and deliberate media handling. Suddenly, the question was not whether the princess had asked for too much. It was whether palace officials had manipulated her words to protect their own influence. Camilla summoned her senior secretary and asked one direct question. Had her name been used to justify the campaign against Kate? He hesitated. That pause told her everything. The Queen Consort understood that her authority had been borrowed by people who believed they were defending her. Kate received messages of support, yet she felt no victory. She told William that she had wanted accountability, not the destruction of another household. The prince listened, but his expression hardened when he read the latest email. It stated that Camilla's team intended to correct the perception that Kate holds priority. The wording didn't prove the Queen approved the leak, but it showed she knew a campaign was being considered. Camilla returned to the disputed necklace herself. She removed it from the evening's wardrobe selection, placed it back inside its case, and closed the lid slowly. Then she instructed her dresser that no historic jewel would be worn until the review ended. The deepest betrayal soon became clear. The communications advisor had exaggerated Kate's demands when speaking to Camilla, then exaggerated the Queen's anger when briefing journalists. Keeping both women suspicious had made him indispensable. William didn't explode. He grew colder. He realized the palace rewarded advisors who created conflict and then offered to control it. The aide was dismissed. Camilla's senior secretary resigned, accepting responsibility for allowing private words to become a weapon. That evening, Camilla sent Kate one final request. No papers, no aides, no king between them. With the architects of the leak removed, only the two women remained, and neither could repair what had happened without admitting what she had feared from the beginning. The second meeting began without accusation. No folders lay on the table. No private secretaries waited outside with prepared statements. Kate arrived alone, and Camilla dismissed even her personal attendant. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Their battle over jewels had exposed something far more painful. One feared being pushed aside before her reign was over, while the other feared being diminished before hers had even begun. Camilla had chosen a small sitting room instead of a formal audience chamber. An audience chamber is a ceremonial room used for official meetings, where rank and protocol shape every exchange. This conversation needed none of it. Kate noticed immediately that the disputed jewels were absent. There were no velvet cases, no reference books, and no advisors waiting to explain what either woman had meant. Camilla asked for one agreement before they continued. Nothing said between them would be recorded, briefed to the press, or repeated by staff. Kate accepted. For once, they would have to trust the very thing the leak had destroyed, each other's word. Camilla spoke first. She admitted that Kate's popularity and future position had made her feel temporary. Every discussion of succession sounded like a reminder that the monarchy was already preparing for life beyond her. The queen consort had spent years fighting to be accepted, yet now she feared becoming a bridge everyone crossed before forgetting who had carried them there. Kate listened before offering her own truth. The reassigned necklace and brooch had made her feel erased. Each unexplained decision seemed like proof that Camilla intended to block her from the symbols connected to the next queen. She had not wanted immediate possession. She had wanted recognition that her future duties mattered. Camilla opened a drawer and removed the original handwritten note. She pushed it across the table and admitted that she should have answered Kate herself before allowing advisors to interpret it. Then came the confession that mattered most. She knew her team planned to challenge what they viewed as Kate's claim over the collection, but she had never authorized the leak. Her silence, however, had given them permission to go further. Kate did not demand humiliation. She did not ask for Camilla's removal from future decisions. Instead, she proposed a written protocol forbidding palace staff from using private family correspondence as part of any media strategy. Camilla had expected surrender. She received a boundary. Her posture softened as Kate's fury became controlled resolve. The women agreed that the disputed necklace would remain unworn at the next state event. Each would choose a different jewel associated with service rather than rank. Their agreement brought private peace, but outside the palace the scandal was reaching its peak. The confrontation had ended behind closed doors, yet beyond the gates the leaked note had become a national argument over power, privacy, and who truly represented the crown's future. For 48 hours Britain debated a private note it had never been meant to read. Some saw Kate as a future queen defending tradition. Others saw Camilla as a woman protecting the dignity of her present role, but the public verdict shifted not because of another leaked paragraph or anonymous briefing. It shifted because of one carefully chosen appearance, one visible gesture, and one image outside Buckingham Palace that told a more powerful story than any headline. Broadcasters reconstructed the scandal hour by hour. They traced the handwritten note, the missing final paragraph, the suspended communications aide, and the resignation inside Camilla's household. Buckingham Palace then released a brief statement confirming that confidential correspondence had been mishandled and that new safeguards would control communication between royal offices. The statement was restrained, but its meaning was severe. The palace accepted that the betrayal had come from within. One morning newspaper captured the anger more sharply. Its front page showed Kate holding the leak pages beneath 4 words, her words, their weapon. The argument changed instantly. This was no longer simply a dispute over a necklace, and had become a story about private trust being twisted into institutional power. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered behind the barriers. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "Privacy is not disloyalty." Others left flowers, but there were no cruel messages aimed at Camilla. That restraint mattered to Kate. She watched the coverage with growing discomfort and warned her staff not to encourage commentary presenting one woman as victorious and the other as defeated. She wanted accountability, not revenge disguised as public support. Camilla felt the pressure differently. She feared that appearing beside Kate would look staged, desperate, and false. For several minutes, the Queen consort considered canceling their scheduled reception. Then she understood that absence would hand control back to the very people who had engineered the conflict. At an event honoring women in public service, Camilla paused before entering and allowed Kate to walk beside her rather than behind. The princess briefly touched her arm. Neither woman wore the disputed jewels. Kate chose a simple pearl brooch associated with quiet service. Camilla selected a modest piece from her own family rather than the royal collection. Without issuing another statement, both women sent the same message. The jewels would no longer speak for them. Public sympathy settled around Kate's restraint, while cautious respect returned to Camilla for standing beside her after accepting responsibility. The palace had survived the headlines, but survival was not the final verdict. When the appearances ended and the display cases were locked again, judgment rested not on who wore the diamonds, but on who had found the strength to stop fighting for them. The leaked note was meant to weaken Kate. Instead, it revealed the discipline beneath her silence. It was meant to protect Camilla's position. Instead, it forced her to confront the insecurity surrounding it. And it was meant to turn royal tradition into a weapon between two women. Instead, it exposed the advisors who profited from division. By the time the palace delivered its final decision, the diamonds had become almost irrelevant. What mattered was who had accepted responsibility and who had earned trust. Charles gathered Kate and Camilla for a meeting. The king placed a communications protocol on the table, a rule controlling royal correspondence, then signed it. No personal note between senior royals could be copied, circulated, or used for public relations planning without written consent. He looked at both women and made the verdict clear. No household would protect one family member by damaging another. Charles confirmed that the royal collection, the jewels and ceremonial objects held, would remain under his control. Yet future decisions involving pieces linked to succession would require discussion with both women. The arrangement handed victory to neither. It ended the silence that had allowed courtiers to create rivalry. Kate never asked to own the disputed necklace. Her victory was deeper. The palace recognized that her future role could not be managed around her or reduced by competing aides. William understood. The prince saw that his wife had emerged stronger. Not because she defeated Camilla, but because she refused to turn betrayal into revenge. His confidence in her ability to carry the crown deepened. Camilla accepted a harder truth. Authority defended through secrecy becomes fragile. The queen consort kept her title and position, but dismissed the final advisor involved in circulating the note. Her redemption came through accountability, not denial. Months later, Camilla wore the diamond necklace at a state occasion with Kate's agreement. The princess wore the sapphire brooch after the older royal recommended it. Before entering the reception, the queen asked whether Kate was comfortable with the arrangement. Kate answered yes. The exchange lasted seconds, yet it carried the respect that should have existed from the beginning. The crisis ended an era in which rival households could manipulate private tensions for influence. Kate's strength rested not in diamonds, but in restraint, boundaries, and duty. Camilla's place survived because she chose honesty over protection. The jewels returned to their cases, the note returned to Kate, and the palace moved forward under a rule born from betrayal. No crown can remain secure when trust is treated.